During the last year, I've built this geodesic greenhouse that I bought from the company Built with Hubs. And I'm super happy with it, and it's a real eye-catcher in the garden. In that period, I've created several videos on how I constructed the dome, so I thought it would be nice to make a full guide on the process. So in this video, you're going to watch how I constructed the frame, how I covered the frame with a plastic sheet, how I added windows, a door and the grow bed, and finally how I insulated the dome. This way you can follow along step by step if you want to set up your own geodesic greenhouse. Enjoy! Hey, welcome back to the garden. My name is Jair and today I'm finally going to show you how I'm building my greenhouse. And not just any greenhouse, but a geodesic dome with a kit from Built with Hubs. Let's go! Before we continue the video, I just want to mention that I'm not sponsored by Built with Hubs and that this will be part 1 of a short series where I show you how I built my greenhouse. Now let me tell you how it came to be that I chose a geodesic dome over a regular greenhouse. About 2 years ago, I saw a video of the channel Exploring Alternatives about a company called Arctic Acres and the geodesic grow domes that they built. And when I saw that, I thought, I want one. Well, not exactly the one from the video, that one is way too expensive for me. But I was hooked on the idea to have a dome for a greenhouse. I looked online and I found another company called Built with Hubs that sells a kit that allows you to make a geodesic dome yourself. So I bought one, and as some of you know, I postponed the entire project for almost a year and a half. Now you might be wondering, what's up with this big empty space in front of me? I've actually been reserving this spot for a greenhouse. I bought all the materials to buy a greenhouse, but I've kept postponing it because other things were higher on the priority list. But now the time has finally come to set it up in my garden. Alright, so this is the box from Built with Hubs, and it's a relatively small box considering what you're making with it. But this box only provides the instructions how to build the dome, as well as all the connector balls or the connector points that obviously connect all the sticks into one geodesic dome. The idea of the Built with Hubs kit is that you can build a dome relatively cheap and relatively easy at the cost of some strength. Normally, geodesic domes are very strong, so strong that you can actually hang from the skeleton or from the frame. Built with Hubs themselves stated that these kits are not meant for like a very strong construction that an adult person can hang from, but they are fine to build a greenhouse with, for example, or a chicken run or an aviary. Now, the good thing of the Built with Hubs kit is that they covered the most difficult part of building a dome, which is getting the sticks in the right angle and the right position in order to build the dome. That being said, it is still going to be a fairly strong construction, and as with all geodesic domes, it has an advantage over regular greenhouses when it comes to weather influences, especially strong winds. And that is because of the shape of it. Now, let's see what's in this box.
What's in the box? What's in the fucking box?
The very first thing you're going to see is, read this first, which is all the tips and tricks and of how to construct your dome. These are also found on their website. And if we further open up the box, and then we'll notice a nice little bag in there, which is actually pretty heavy. This is basically it. I have to say, they do a pretty good job making it visually very easy for you to check what's in the bag or in the box. And they just make it a very fun experience. All right, well, let's open this baby up. Right over here you can see all the connector hubs that will eventually go on every corner of the geodesic dome. There are a few connectors that have 6 points as well as a few that have 5 points, and a lot of screws and a lot of other metal parts. And then these are going to be all the little connector balls that you should fixate onto your sticks so that they can fit into one of these. And that's all of it. That's all that's in the bag. They will explain everything, so it looks quite intimidating at first, but don't worry. If your preparation is on point, the dome will be there in less than an hour.
Alright, time to prepare all the materials to build the dome. First off, I needed to saw the sticks at the correct length. Build with hubs give the exact number of sticks you need, as well as the length of them, depending on the size of your dome. You can determine all of this via the dome calculator on their website, which is a very handy tool, I must say. In total, I'm going to need 30 short sticks and 35 long sticks. After that was done, the edges of the sticks were still a bit rough, so it was sanding time. After an hour or two, all 65 sticks were done. Now, the next step is optional, but I would recommend it, and that is to drill holes at each side of the sticks. These will be to later attach the connector balls. You can choose not to pre-drill these holes and screw the connector balls in one go, but you'll run the risk of splitting the wood. Then I wanted to weatherproof the wood and give it a nice color. So I got this mahogany varnish. Perhaps needless to say, but it's easier to place multiple sticks next to each other and use a roller instead of painting them one by one with a brush. This is also a lot of work, but it's worth it if you want a wooden frame to last longer. Now to prepare the poles that will be used as a base. This will elevate the entire dome, creating some valuable vertical space. You can again have a preview of this in the dome calculator at the side of Build with Hubs. The poles themselves are 1 meter long, and I drew a line at 60 centimeters. The lower 40 centimeters will be hammered into the ground and will act as an anchor for the dome. I painted this part with a black seal to protect the poles from being exposed to too much water in the soil. And before anyone says, "Oh my god, you're putting toxic black death into the soil," this is a non-toxic liquid rubber seal that hardens after it dries. As a side note, I could have opted to create the base out of rectangular beams with steel ground anchors, but that would increase the cost of the project significantly, and so I chose not to do that. The upper 60 centimeters of the poles will be the actual base, and I painted them with the same mahogany varnish. As a last step, it was time to screw in the little connector balls at each side of the sticks. This is a fairly easy thing to do, but again, pretty time consuming. So, after a few days of preparing all of the materials, it is finally time to get it all over to the garden.
Okay, so we've just unloaded the entire car and now it's time to build up the dome.
Once again, how to set up this dome is all explained and easy to understand. And although this footage is sped up, we managed to set up the dome in about 30 minutes. Then it was time to determine where we were going to place the poles that would form the base. We marked the position of the poles by sticking some thin sticks through the lower hubs. Then we cut out the shape of a cross in the landscape fabric and hammered in the first pole. This process needs to be done very carefully because it will determine if your dome will be properly leveled. To make sure all of the poles are equal in height, we used a long stick and a level and continued this with every next pole.
Okay, so we've just hammered these poles into the ground. It was quite the effort, but we managed to do it. These 10 poles will form the base of the dome. We've also leveled them out so the dome will be as straight as possible. So the next step will be to lift the dome on top of the poles and attach them with some screws, and then the whole thing will be elevated even more.
Lifting the dome with 4 people was easy, but even though we measured everything as precise as we could, we ran into a little bit of trouble.
So we hit a few bumps in the road. One of these sticks actually broke, but luckily we had a spare, so I only need to saw that to the correct length and then we can replace it. Another problem is that we leveled all of the poles, but there's still a little bit of space in between some of the hubs and the poles. So what we're going to do now is saw a few extra circular planks or circular pieces of wood to fill up that blank space, and then hopefully we can connect the dome to the poles properly. But standing in the dome right now, I'm getting really excited to finish up this whole project, and yeah, let's continue.
After we corrected our mistakes, it was time to clamp the hubs and lock the frame into place. Once again, the description is fairly simple, and this is where the rest of the metal parts come into play. And finally, the kit comes with a ring clamp that is often attached to the highest point of the dome. This allows you to hang something from the ceiling, so to speak, such as a decorative piece or perhaps a string to lead a plant upwards. In the Netherlands, it is custom to plant a so-called May tree next to a house when the highest point of constructing said house has been reached. And so we honored that tradition in our own creative way.
Hey there, welcome back and welcome to part 2 of setting up the Geodesic Dome greenhouse. This video will be about covering the dome, the challenges that come with it, and how I eventually did it. I hope, of course, that this video will be helpful to you if you want to set up your own dome and covering it with a plastic sheet. Let's go. Welcome to the inside of the dome. A quick recap. To build the dome, I bought a kit from Built with Hubs. And once you have decided how big you want your dome to be, they clearly specify all the dimensions of the dome, including the surface area of the dome itself. Now, this is of course important if you want to make a greenhouse out of your dome, the way I'm doing right now. The surface area of my dome is about 20 square meters, so I bought a big sheet of professional UV resistant plastic to cover the dome. But herein lies the big challenge, and it is something that I have been dreading ever since I had this idea in my head of building a dome about 2 years ago. You see, you have a 3D semi-spherical structure that you want to cover with a 2D plastic sheet. Now, if you want to cover that dome with the plastic sheet without cutting it, you're going to get faults one way or another. Now, of course, I looked online to see how others did a similar project such as mine, but either the methods were not very clear or they were just not suitable for my build. At first I thought, well, let's cut out a piece of plastic for every triangle in the dome and then staple them to the sticks and cover the dome in its entirety like that. And you could do that if all the sticks would go from one corner to the other. The problem with this build, ironically, are the hubs themselves. If you would do it this way, then each point of every triangle would end up at a hub. And since the hubs themselves are kind of an open space, there is no real way of attaching the triangle to the hub. Not only that, but it would also become a problem for the overall waterproofness of the dome, if that is a word. So after brainstorming quite a bit, we decided to cut out a big piece of plastic that would cover 3 or 4 triangles at the same time, as well as leaving a little bit of extra plastic around the hubs themselves.
We would fold the excess material over the sticks and then staple it, trying to keep in mind to overlap the plastic from top to bottom where two big pieces of plastic would meet. This proved to be a very solid solution to the entire challenge, making it waterproof as well as minimizing folding. This was all very time consuming though, and that's because that big piece of plastic was very unhandy to work with, and truth be told, we were still figuring things out as we were doing it, so. Now, I've just mentioned it, but it is of course a good idea to make your greenhouse as waterproof as possible. In the case of the dome, we found that it works best if you start with the lower layers and then work your way up towards the top when you're covering it with plastic, so that the top layer plastic can overlap the lower one, much like roof tiles. This will just make sure that any rain that falls on the dome will not trickle inwards. That being said, you might have noticed in some footage that we actually didn't start with the base, and that sort of goes against what I just said. Now that is because I knew I had enough plastic to cover the entire dome. I just didn't know if I had enough to cover the base as well. And if that would be the case, then I could always cover the base with something else, such as wooden planks, for example. Of course, we did keep in mind that it would actually work out, and eventually it did. We did have enough plastic to cover the base. So what we did is left the lower part of the plastic of the dome loose so that it could always overlap the base in the end. And that worked out just fine. After the first day, we managed to complete the lower circle of the dome, bar the piece that would become the entrance. And now all there was left to do was cover the top section. Now we could have continued the way we did it, so that means covering 3 triangles at a time, and it would be perfectly fine if you would complete the entire dome like that. However, I was left with a little bit of a dilemma. You see, both me and the people that were helping me out were a little bit short on time, and there was also a lot of rain in the forecast, and I really wanted to cover the dome before all the rain would come. So at that point I wondered, since we had less surface area to cover, if it would be viable to just throw the rest of the plastic on top of the dome and staple it to it, provided that yes, we would probably have some folding. And that is eventually what we decided to do. We threw the cover over it, tried to make it as straight as possible, stapled it into place, and then roughly cut off the excess plastic at the bottom of it. Eventually, yes, we got a few folds in the plastic, but we gathered them in front of some of the sticks, and I will try to make them look a little bit cleaner later on in the project. Now for the base, it was going to be a lot easier since these were all rectangular shapes. I had to get a little bit creative with the plastic because cutting weird shapes in the beginning of this project left me with, well, more weird shapes of plastic, but eventually we got it done. And that is the cover of the dome pretty much done. The next step will be to add a few windows to the dome to improve the ventilation. I'm of course going to put some grow beds in there because my plants really need a place to stay right now. And I'm going to make a door right over here. I'm also going to try to get rid of these folds, but that will be towards the end of the project. Hello there. Hey, and welcome back to part 3 of setting up the grow dome. Today we're going to talk about finishing up the grow dome by adding a few windows, a door, and of course the grow beds to grow your vegetables in. Let's go. Starting off with the windows, preferably you want to add 2 windows to your dome if that's possible. This will create a draft through your dome and it will help with ventilation. Now there are many different ways that you can add windows to your dome. I've seen people adding windows, for example, in this corner of a triangle, or use an entire triangle by itself. I chose not to do that because I think an entire triangle as a window would become too vulnerable to strong winds. I chose a downward pointing triangle and added a crossbar to it so that it would create a smaller window. Once that crossbar was into place, we measured the dimensions inside the triangle to create a second triangle that would act as a window. A small tip, try not to make the secondary triangle exactly fitting inside the frame because that will prevent it from opening up later on. Once we constructed the window frame, we placed it inside of the outer frame and used it as a stencil to cut the plastic in a V shape, leaving the upper part connected to the dome. This was pretty scary to do because you only get one chance to do it right, but it worked out in the end. The small plastic strips that remain on the sides can be folded inwards and stapled to the dome. Then we added 2 hinges to the window frame and added a piece of plastic that was just a little bit bigger than the window frame itself. I've also added this crossbar to the inside of the window, preventing it from hinging inwards when the window is closed. After that, we temporarily put the window into place to test if it would open up properly. If it does not open up properly, then now you still have the chance to shave off some of the wood from the window frame before you finally connect it to the dome. Now, once everything works out, you can screw it into place. You want to prevent water from getting into your dome when it's raining. Now, I mentioned that piece of plastic that we left connected to the top. You can cut that off, leaving it to overlap the window by a few centimeters. And that, in combination with the excess plastic of the window itself, creates a roof tile construction that will prevent water from getting into your dome. It works! We have a window! Now, to keep your window open, I choose the simple way and just add a stick in between the frames. But there are even some hydraulic hinges that react to temperature, so that when your dome gets hot, the windows open up, and when it cools down, the windows close. But they are pretty expensive, so that is completely up to you. And that's your window done. And that is your window done. All right, the second subject of today, the grow beds. Now, first of all, you don't have to use grow beds inside your dome. You can just set up your dome and plant directly into the ground. If you do choose to use grow beds in your grow dome, you can choose whatever shape you want. For example, round buckets or just the regular rectangular grow beds. However, since the dome is a circular object, probably the most optimal shape would be a ring grow bed, as I like to call it. And that is exactly what I did, as you can see. This is also the reason why I started with the windows first, because it would leave me all the space I needed to maneuver and to work on the windows before any grow beds would be blocking my way. Before you want to construct any grow beds, it's probably wise to level the surface area as much as you can. So I put down some landscape fabric underneath the entire dome, and then I covered that up with a lot of gravel, and that would even out any irregularities on the surface. You can use different materials to create your grow bed, for example, wood or bricks. If you have a lot of bricks available to you, then that might be an idea because they will last you quite a long time. And it's easier to create the rings because you can reposition the bricks to your liking. I chose wooden planks because I had a lot of them available free of extra cost. So I had a self-made TV cabinet that was just sitting in the attic and it wasn't really being used anymore. And it was varnished and everything. And lo and behold, it was almost exactly the amount of wood that I needed to create this entire ring grow bed. So talking about recycling stuff. To set up a ring grow bed, you want to create an outer ring and an inner ring. Creating the outer ring is pretty simple. You just want to measure the distance between 2 poles of your dome and then saw the plank to the correct length if that is necessary, and then just screw them into place. As with most grow beds, you don't want the depth of the grow bed to be over, say, 90 centimeters, because otherwise you'll be reaching inwards too much. And so that's also what the distance should be between the outer ring as well as the inner ring. So in my case, it's about 90 centimeters. If you want to place the inner ring in the center as much as possible and you're having trouble determining what the actual center of your dome is, there are 2 simple ways to determine that. First off, you can add a rope in between 2 different sets of opposite facing poles of your dome. Now, the point where those 2 ropes will cross will be the center of your dome. Another way is to add a rope with a little weight from the center of the ceiling of your dome, and that will hang down and it will roughly point out where the center of your dome is, provided that your dome is pretty level. Once you've set up the inner ring and connected everything with screws, you can add some additional planks at the sides at the entrance of the dome, and that will close off the entire grow ring.
And now it's time to fill up the entire ring grow bed with soil and place those warmth-loving crops in there. The last thing we are going to cover is the door. Now, if you want to set up a greenhouse, then a door, much like the windows, is strongly advised to add. After all, you do want to control and/or contain the temperatures inside your greenhouse to a certain degree. Opening the door and the windows to let cooler air inside during hot days, and at the same time closing everything off to keep the warmth inside the greenhouse when the days are getting colder. For the door, I have some general tips because it really depends on how big your dome is and what you really want to do with that door. I've seen multiple varieties, such as a few simple plastic flaps that hang from the top of the door. I wouldn't really do that because it doesn't really isolate the dome that well. You can make a door that has hinges on one side and opens up like this, such as mine. Or you can make a door that is split in the middle and it opens up like a saloon door. Now, as you can see, we built a kite-shaped door as well as an additional frame that would be connected to the initial entrance of the dome. I chose this method so that the upper part of the door would not have to be constructed at an angle following the shape of the dome. So, the frame was screwed against the two poles of the entrance and then secured with an extra piece of wood at the top. This makes the entire structure very sturdy. After that was done, we placed the door inside the frame and screwed the hinges into place. It's best to do this with some help so that you can easily reposition the door, making sure it opens and closes correctly. Then it was time to cover the new entrance with some plastic. Much like the dome itself, I tried to do this in an overlapping roof tile fashion, so to keep out as much rain as possible. And that's the door done. Not too bad, huh? Now, of course, you can add a handle for easier access into your dome, or you can add a lock so that nobody really starts sneaking in your dome. But for now, this one works just fine. And that's it, a successfully set up geodesic greenhouse. Now, you can add a lot of extras to the dome and maybe I'll make a video about that in the future, but for now, the grow dome is fully functional. This short series is of course more focused on the Built with Hub kit, but I do hope these videos will be helpful and that you've gathered some more information, tips and tricks if you want to set up your own geodesic dome. If you have a greenhouse, then it can be tricky to keep it warm during the winter, especially if it's off-grid. So in today's video, I will show you how you can keep that precious warmth inside of your greenhouse for a longer period of time. There are several ways of doing this, and insulating your greenhouse with bubble wrap plastic is one of them. This increases the so-called R value, and the R value is a measurement of how well a certain type of insulation prevents the transfer of warmth from one side to the other. So in short, the better your insulation, the better your R value and the longer the warmth stays inside of your greenhouse. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, I thought that the greenhouse was there to capture warmth in the first place, so why do you still need to insulate it? Yes, a greenhouse will warm up very quickly, but it will also lose that warmth equally as fast during the night. Now this does depend on the type of material that your greenhouse is covered with, but it is especially true for my greenhouse, which is covered with a single layer of plastic sheet. Bubble wrap plastic itself is of course made up out of all these little air pockets which massively help to insulate anything that you use it for.
Not only that, but if you want to use bubble wrap plastic to insulate your greenhouse, then I do advise to keep a little bit of space in between the original cover of your greenhouse and the bubble wrap plastic. This creates an additional air pocket in between the two layers, increasing the R value even further. Not only that, but as you can see, I have created this reflective wall on the north side of my geodesic dome, and I will explain a little bit later on in the video why I have done that. Now, if you do want to make use of bubble wrap plastic, then make sure it is UV resistant, otherwise it will not last long inside of your greenhouse. This video is of course a little bit more tailored towards my geodesic dome, however I do think that the information is equally as helpful if you have a regular shaped greenhouse. Now, with all the boring stuff out of the way, let's go back into time and I'll show you how I did it.
Marty! You've got to come back with me! Where?
Back to the grow dome! Before I'm going to start insulating the greenhouse, I'm going to try to clean the inside as much as possible. There's a lot of condensed, but there's especially some green dirt buildup on the inside, so let's get rid of that first. Yeah, very dirty. So I just finished cleaning the inside of the greenhouse, especially the green algae-like buildup. And I have to say, I feel a little bit more naked now that everything is more transparent. All right, let's start increasing the R value of the grow dome. So I started off by adding reflective bubble wrap plastic onto the northern wall of my greenhouse first, and I wanted to follow the angles of the dome as much as I could, so there was a lot of precise measuring going on. Needless to say, this is a lot easier if you're with 2 people or more. There are several reasons why I chose to have a reflective wall on the north side of my greenhouse. First of all, it is made out of bubble wrap plastic, so it does insulate the dome. And as you might have guessed, it also reflects light. Since I live in the northern hemisphere, the sun travels from east to south to west, which means that most sunlight will shine towards that northern wall. If you have a transparent wall on the north side of your greenhouse, then you might, so to speak, lose some sunlight and warmth that enters your greenhouse because it will also exit it on the other side. A reflective wall will of course bounce some of that sunlight back into your greenhouse, increasing the overall effectiveness of it. Specifically for the dome, because of the weird angle of this reflective wall, the low sun that hits it will actually be redirected downwards. This means that any plants that I grow directly underneath this wall will get exposed to more sunlight. I can expand on this idea even further, and this is completely copied from the Arctic Acres company, which built these beautiful domes. I will put a link in the description below. But I could forego some of the grow bed that is directly beneath the reflective wall over here and instead add some bottles or jerry cans or even a tank full of water. And this will add thermal mass to your greenhouse. I won't go too deep into what thermal mass is, but you can see it as a storage battery for warmth. As the sunlight that gets redirected heats up the water, and that same heat will be released during the night, keeping your greenhouse warmer. After quite some hours of measuring, cutting and stapling, the reflective wall was finally finished.
Yeah!
Yeah.
Woo!
Now it was time to add the normal bubble wrap plastic to the rest of the dome. We're about to cover the inside of the dome with some bubble wrap plastic. I have 5 of these rolls. There are 1 meter by 5 meter. And if I put them at the base, which is where we're gonna start, this is double the size of the base, so or at least double the height of the base. Probably gonna cover the entire base with 1 roll, so let's find out. So I'm going to cut one of these rolls into 2 halves to use for the base. There, that's a lot easier. Adding the bubble wrap plastic to the base was pretty straightforward, as the base is made up out of all of these rectangular pieces. The tricky part now was to cover all of the triangles without creating too much folds. Lucky for us, the roll was almost exactly as high as the triangles, so we chose to add the plastic in a horizontal band. We could cover about 5 or 6 triangles at a time, as this would create only a single fold halfway that we could hide behind one of the sticks. This method will vary depending on the size of your dome and hence the triangles, so maybe going vertical or in several horizontal bands might work better for you. As stated before, this is so much easier done with at least 2 people. Some extra tape to hold up the plastic or adding a few marks to cut a straight line will also make your life a lot easier. So we finished covering the base ring and the first ring with bubble wrap plastic, and of course we also covered the north wall with reflective bubble wrap plastic. Now all there is to do is to finish up the upper half of the dome. If we would continue covering the rings in a horizontal fashion like we've done before, then more and more folding will probably occur. So we're going to try it in a different way, in a more vertical way. So we're going to continue covering this section first because that mirrors the same shape as the first ring that we did over here. This indeed proved to be the correct way for us to cover the rest of the dome. The sun even came out at some point, warming up the greenhouse to a very cozy 25 degrees Celsius. So after quite some shoulder tension, the insulation of the dome was finally finished. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but are there any drawbacks to using bubble wrap plastic? Well, yes there are. First of all, cost. Of course, adding bubble wrap plastic to your greenhouse costs you a little bit more. I think all the bubble wrap plastic together for me cost me about 55 euros, so not the cheapest little project. Second, effort. There is a lot of effort going into this. Maybe not so much if you have a regular house-shaped greenhouse, but for me, with all the weird angles inside of my geodesic dome, there was a lot of measuring and cutting, so do know what you're getting yourself into. Third, there will be less light penetrating your greenhouse overall speaking because the bubble wrap plastic actually fractures the light a little bit. Now, I have found out that this is not too much of a problem because the greenhouse is very bright, as you can see right now, but do keep that in mind. The fourth drawback is that bubble wrap plastic will only last you a few seasons, so even though it is UV resistant, it will break down over time, but I do hope that I can get about 3 to 4 seasons out of them. And the last drawback is that there can be some condensed buildup in between the 2 layers, which can further decrease the amount of light that penetrates your greenhouse. Not only that, but there is a possibility that bugs can get in between there, and it will be a very difficult thing to get them out of there. So again, do keep that in mind. That being said, I am super happy with the progress that I've made, and I can't wait to put the very first seedlings into my grow bed, as I have a few of them on standby already. Thank you so much for watching this guide. I really hope this information was useful to you. If you are a beginning gardener, then you might like some of my other videos on my channel, so go check them out. See you next time. Bye bye.